you don't have to look something up to believe that it's to believe it for yourself. Like, you don't have to fact check your feelings, right?
Wow, that's the quote of, of the fucking century.
You don't have to fact check your feelings. You do have to fact check your facts, right?
Hello and welcome back to Can't Let It Go. It is an audio PowerPoint party. It's a season 3. I am Matt and I use he, him pronouns.
I'm AC. I use they, them pronouns.
Like I said, we're back for season 3, which is crazy.
And the script says no more than 10 seconds of goofing off. So this is my contribution to goofing off.
We're really happy to be back. I will say, I would say, I don't know about UAC, but I do know about UAC. It's been a really stressful, 90 to 120 days.
Yeah, we took a break from the podcast thinking great, we'll take a break and we'll get through all of the tough stuff that's on our plates right now. And then we'll come back and we'll be so rested and refreshed. And then it was hey, I know that you already had one big heaping serving of responsibilities on your plate. Would you like 5, maybe 6 more? That's how 10. I don't in a lot. Too many.
Yeah.
It's like the moment when you've gone to a salad bar at the grocery store and you think that you've been conservative about loading up your bowl, and then you get to the checkout and it's like, this is a $30 salad, and you're like, wow, I've done it. That's terrible.
I know we're not here to talk about salads, but every day at the days that I go into the office, because hey, I moved across the country and live very near DC now, but the days that I go into the office, I sometimes go to this one station. It's not a salad station, but I'm often I didn't actually get that much today, and then it's nope, that's $18.
Yeah the salad bars will really get you. I love the customizable options, but they do make it too easy to not pay attention to how much things weigh.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's been salad.
We literally said we were not going to do a nugget today because we have too much to talk about, and we gave you a nugget about salad on our
Yeah. So Matt moved across the country and is now in the DC area where I also live. And then what are some of the things that happened after that you think are worth mentioning, Matt?
I don't know. Maybe the fact that you got COVID twice in 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah. Let's see. Well, also your partner got COVID,
right,
and then
correct.
I got COVID, and then I got COVID again. Well, then my partner had a surgery, and then I got COVID again. And then also in that time period, my parents were visiting. My partner also graduated from law school.
Hey, we did a little celebration on the sidewalk for her.
We did. Congratulations, Mac. I know both you can hear me recording this, and also you'll listen to this later. So woohoo! But yeah, now we're back, and let me just say, a remarkable thing is getting to live close to your best friends, period. But getting to live in, within a 20-minute drive of not just one, but many of my closest friends who have been my closest friends for many, many years. I don't think we're quite at the age where I have to be we've been friends for an undisclosed number of years, but it's 16 full years at this point, or pretty close to it. The joy of getting to see your face on a regular basis is a highlight of these past terrible months.
I agree. As much as it's been very stressful, the highlights for me have been the first couple nights we were here and you all at the house, and us making a fire and having dinner outside, and I don't know, going to the Decemberist concert with you right before you got sick, probably where you got sick. But
I got sick the next night at punk rock karaoke, but I know for sure because of who else I interacted with who got sick that weekend. But the simple joy of Matt texting me on a Friday night and being hey, what are you doing? And me being oh, actually, I'm going to see the Decemberists. You're also one of your favorite bands. Do you want to come? Is remarkable. Truly a gift.
Short story for everyone else that's not me and you, which is that I am pretty sure the first time that AC and I were in the same room was at the 2009 Decemberist show in Tulsa, Oklahoma at Kane's Ballroom for the Hazards of Love tour. I am like 99% sure that is the first time we were in a room, unless like by chance we were at the same research or something.
Or if you maybe went to any of the Reliant K shows at Kane's Ballroom in 2004 and 2005.
One day we'll do a Reliant K episode because I'm a huge fan. I'm just going to claim that I still am. But I've never been to a Reliant K show. So.
Wow, good for you.
Yeah.
That Decemberist show in 2009 at Kane's Ballroom is like my holy grail concert, the concert I wish I could experience over and over again. And it brings me a lot of joy to know that though we didn't know each other at the time, we were both in that room together. So
let's get to the topic. And what I'll just say is like, hey, we've got a lot of things planned for you. We've talked to AC and I have spent a lot of time over the past couple months talking about what the show is. And we really think that the phrase that we used to use to open the show about the things stuck in our heads, is really does define the thing. But it's a lot of things that we say we can't stop thinking about, often things that we know a lot about without having to do research, but then we go do that research anyway. And honestly, not all of those things are like good and a fun time. And I also just want to say that like, we didn't feel that we could start another season of the show without talking about the genocide happening in Palestine.
yeah, that's exactly right.
And so that's what we're going to do today. And I think that can be a tough topic, but I think that you will get a lot out of sticking around and listening to this episode, if only because AC is a really smart person and thinks thinks a lot of really smart thoughts and will inform you. So,
oh, that's so nice, Matt. You are also a really smart person. But I mean, I think the other thing that is worth saying at this moment is like, it is difficult to talk about any topic on which people like feel polarized, right? Or feel stuck or feel like they don't know how to begin a conversation around something that is so big and so painful in so many different ways, right? And like but the thing that is, I think, worth it is having that tough conversation, especially with your friends, right? Something that I know that we really value about this podcast is like, we have been friends for a really long time in a way that means that we get to have tough conversations that don't start from the place of, well, I need to give you the full context of who I am as a person so that you don't misjudge or misinterpret what I am going to say. And it is really hard to do that when you know that the root place of the topic is one where maybe you haven't talked about it with a friend before and you might disagree, and that might change the nature of your relationship. So this is to say, I'm excited to have this conversation, even if this topic is one that is difficult and emotionally charged. But I will also say for our listeners, I won't really go into descriptions of violence and harm. Right? Like, we don't need to contextualize or say for you. And in fact, like, this is kind of the point of the episode, right? What is happening in Palestine, what is being perpetrated in Palestine by the government of Israel with US backed support is genocide, plain and simple, right? We are all seeing it unfold before our eyes. And ultimately, Matt, like, what I want to talk to you about today is that condemning genocide, it's not complicated. And you don't have to be an expert to do it. I think one of the other quotes that has been stuck in my head since I saw it going around on Instagram, is the one day when it's safe, when there is no personal downside to calling a thing what it is, when it's too late to hold anyone accountable, everyone will always have been against this. And yeah, I don't know. That's kind of like my starting point for this, because this is an issue that I have a lot of feelings around, because it's something that I studied when I was in college. Like, I took multiple classes in college about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and they were labeled as such, right? Always framed as two sides of one issue, right? And I don't know, it seems interesting and new to me, the ways in which we have landed in this place where feels like people think that we're having these conversations for the first time and that they're not reflective of literally decades and decades of scholarship and and activism and community and resistance to genocide, occupation, and oppression.
Yeah. And I'm sure that you have plans to say something like this, but the thought that I often have is we're treating all of this as if it started last year on October 7th.
Yeah.
And that is pretty objectively untrue. And if people give it more credit than that, they often go back to 1948. And it was a problem before then too, right?
Yeah.
Like Palestinians have, what's the word I'm looking for? Have been oppressed by various oppressors over decades, centuries, and it is not a new phenomenon. And like you said, a lot of the conversations we're having now, as if we're having them for the first time, have been happening for as long.
Yeah. And I mean, all of that being said, I did also just say it's worth having the conversation. If this is your first time having the conversation, like, it is hard and scary to like have that conversation with all of that knowledge in the background, right?
Yes.
So like, I think all of that to say, what this episode will not be, right, is I am not an expert. You are not an expert. I took some classes on Israel-Palestinian conflict in, sorry, that was scare quotes around conflict in an audio format. I can't use my hands. We're not experts.
Correct.
I'm not a historian. I am not an international policy expert, right? I am where we are, what this is two friends discussing what it means to live in a world where we are seeing a genocide play out in real time, like without real condemnation or action from our government, and the knowledge that that government is complicit in providing material support and like unmitigated access to international political power, unlike any other political alliance in existence. The having the knowledge that like the US has voted with Israel at the United Nations 100% of the time in every vote since the beginning of the United Nations, right? We are also like, I do want to acknowledge what you just said, right? This occupation goes beyond what began on October 7th. It, in fact, began over 100 years ago during the British and French occupations of the region. There is a very complicated history of like Christian Zionism that goes alongside all of this, right? Even before World War II, even before the first Nakba, right? Like this is in the same way that like the genocides of indigenous peoples in what is now the United States, in the same way that genocides in Mexico of indigenous people in Mexico, that the colonial history of the world going back to the colonial era of 1600s and the 1700s and the 1800s, all of that impacts what we talk about now, and even farther into history, just because of where in the world, right, Palestine is. This is a genocide. It is not just a genocide in Gaza, right? Palestinians living in the occupied West Bank also are living under Israeli oppression and are being brutalized by the Israeli government. And this conflict is not the first in these types of crackdowns. Now, it certainly is the most severe, the most violent that we have seen in a long time.
In my lifetime.
It is not, in my lifetime, yes. But it is not new. So that's kind of what this is and what this is not.
Yeah, I think one of the things when we were talking about doing this episode that was really important to me was that I think you have some perspective that I don't. And also, you don't, like we said at the top, you don't need to be an expert to have feelings on the genocide in Palestine and to take action. Like, I think from the notes that I've seen that you've made, you are going to give us some background info and do some of that work. But like, it's not required to call a genocide, and it's not required to take action to help the people suffering in Gaza.
Yeah. I mean, something that people have often said, right, is like, one of the ways that we got here is the pressure to be an expert, right? This myth or misconception that you need to be an expert in something before you speak on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I want to point out that, in fact, being an expert in international politics does not always mean that you're standing against genocide. In fact, there are many international policy experts in the United States who are doing the work of propping up the U.S. government's position on this, right? There are some brave people who have resigned from their jobs, who have said no to being complicit in, you know, the Defense Department or the State Department's actions in the U.S. But, like, it's our universities, as much as our universities train people who do the kinds of things that you and I do, rejecting of the narrative, being curious about engaging in like critical thinking, learning from the world around us, right? Our institutions also produce the kinds of people, right? And this is a lot of what the protests around on college campuses are really centered around, is, right, the way that our institutional educational system is also complicit in reifying genocide and the kinds of attitudes and things that make us think that this kind of thing is okay. Part of what, you know, as we thought about this episode, what was really hard is, like, I'm not Palestinian, right? You're not Palestinian. You don't need to hear from us about how awful this is to be on board with that idea. There are plenty of Palestinian people. I mean, Bisan comes to mind immediately as someone who has been documenting this and has become a viral sensation in her own right, documenting the horrors of what has been happening first in Gaza City, and then as people were forced south, the occupation and shelling in Rafah, you know, all of these things are being reported in real time in front of us. And so what I think is where I want to start the conversation is by talking about what we do and what reactions people like us have had in this moment, right? So one of the things about, like, you don't have to be an expert, but, like, a lot of people have been frustrated when speaking out because they are getting corrected when they do speak out, right? By people who know more than them. And that's, like, one of the things that is hard about just communicating online in general, right? Is, like, you are communicating to an enormous audience of people when you are maybe accustomed to communicating to, like, your friends, right? Or your family members, right? In smaller scenarios. When you're posting on a public forum, if you have an unlocked account, anyone can see that information. And, like, it makes it feel like you can't have questions. You can't have uncertainties, right? To be able to say what you want to say, you need to be able to unequivocally back that up. And you need to be able to back that up with, like, facts. You can't just say, this is true because I think it, right? And that is true for some things, but I'm here to say you can just say, I see what is happening and I think that it is wrong. And I see what is happening and I think that what is being perpetrated is a genocide based on what I am seeing and, like, how I feel in my body, right? Yeah. Because I think that, like, physically, my body has a very big reaction when I see that kind of violence being perpetrated. And I think that, like, we all have to get a little bit more comfortable with sitting in the discomfort of, I am going to say, I think that this is a genocide, and someone is going to say, I don't agree with you. And, like, I have to just sit in the discomfort of, like, okay, I think you're wrong. Like, and not just I think you're wrong, you are wrong. Like, like, I don't understand how that can be, like, how we can have this miscommunication.
Yeah. I think you mentioned creators, people making things on the internet, but, like, I don't know, just your average person too, right? There's, like, your average person who, like, wants to show support or state an opinion, right? I think, I don't know, I felt just myself on my, personal social media presence, not that that is everything, but have been like, do I want to share this? Because I know the 7 people that for some reason still follow me that are going to have something to say about it, and have felt that pressure to not be as clear about what I believe to be true, right? And what I believe to be wrong, simply because of social pressures, because of the people in my life, right?
Yeah. And
not wanting to deal with, I basically never want to deal with people thinking that I'm wrong about something. That's a personal failing. Yeah. But yeah, and in this case, it pressed up against the fact that I do so strongly believe that that Palestinians are being treated so poorly, and that it is masked by a regime that wants to toss that all aside and blame it on anti-Semitism, and that disgusts me, right?
Yeah.
I still, even though I feel all of those things strong, I still find it difficult to go up against some of those social pressures.
Yeah. And I think it feels, I think one of the other trends that I have noticed is that often people feel like this discomfort where it's like when folks start to talk about anti-Semitism, right? Then it's like, well, what about like anti-Muslim sentiments? What about like racist and xenophobia sentiments targeted towards Arabs? What about people who live in that region who are Christian, right? Like what about Christian Arabs, right? Like this is as a rich cultural, this is a country with a rich cultural landscape, just like any other country, right? And there are complexities to this question. And so I think that like the answer is always like, it is big. It is difficult, right?
Right. But being against the genocide is not.
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to call that out. But
I think there is also this piece of like, being against the genocide is not. And also, we have this pressure to like get it right on the first go, right?
Right.
Like to your point of like, I struggling with being told you're wrong. I don't think that that's a personal failing. I think that that's a very normal human experience.
Right.
Because one of the hardest things is like, learning how to say, you are telling me I'm wrong, but I feel so deeply that I am right. And how do I reconcile like those two things? Yeah. And one of the ways that like culturally we have done each other a disservice is really like blurred the relationship between facts, quote unquote, and opinions. Right. But in pursuit of like what I think is like not ultimately a bad thing, right? Like one of the things and the challenges of decolonization, and in this sense I mean decolonizing your mind, right? Is that in order to do that, you must question the systems and the institutions of truth, right? And who is telling me what is true? How do I know what to or who to trust for reliable information, right? When we start to question these systems, we sometimes wind up in this place where we blur that line between fact and opinion, right? I reject hegemonic cultural teachings. Sorry. I gotta take the hat off. Okay. I'm not using the words like hegemony anymore. Okay, right? Like I reject dominant narratives around Palestine. I reject the dominant narrative that this is a Palestinian provocation, right? And then what comes next after that? I reject the dominant narrative, and now I stand in the conviction of my personal opinion as though it was fact. And sometimes you reject the dominant narrative and you stand in your personal opinion as though it is fact, and it is fact, right? Like you are aligned with what is true in the world for people. And in particular, right, like that is the experience of many people who are oppressed in many different kinds of ways, right? Like my queerness and my queer identity, I stand in my truth of my transness and my queerness, and that is true and right and good, right? But when I weaponize my own identity to erase the privilege that I carry with my whiteness, or when I start to say, I reject, like, I have, one of the things I've really struggled with in this round of having COVID is like, I don't trust the CDC to provide information that actually keeps immunocompromised and disabled communities safe from COVID. And then I had to deal with the question of, if I don't trust the CDC, then where do I get my information from? Do I base it on my own personal opinions and understandings of immunology? Who do I go for? Do I have to do my own research, right? And it creates this situation that people are put in really consistently where it becomes difficult to know what is true. And then also, all around us, people validate opinion as fact. There are literally entire news networks devoted to that. Yes, this is me talking about Fox News. I'm sorry. I didn't think I would ever talk about Fox News on this podcast. But and it's not just Fox, CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times, for crying out loud, right, is publishing opinion as fact, right? The paper of record is using passive language to distance the violence from the state of Israel, right? And it's not just on that issue. The paper of record does this on many different issues, right? I don't know. What do you think? I don't know. This is feels like such a big thing. I don't even know what question to ask you. How do you see the blurring of facts and opinions showing up in your world?
The way that it often takes shape for me is more in, I feel like I am aware of at least popular outlets. I have some literacy to understand what to expect from those outlets.
Sure.
Right. I expect the neoliberalism of the New York Times, right? I don't know, just make some comparison. I expect the Atlantic to be basically the same, but a little to the left, right? I have all of these placed in my head, and then I hear other people talk about them. Not even other people that I'm not talking about Newsmax watchers, right? Or
Sure.
Fox News fans. I'm talking about just a regular person in my life who I mostly agree with on things, right? Talk about them. And I'm like, oh, we have very different landscapes in terms of our understanding of media, just in the world.
Yeah.
Totally not about world events or news at all. But this happened at work the other day. I was chatting in Slack about video games with people. And a thing that I react really strongly to and against, frankly, is when people just bucket, broadly reject the idea of journalism, right? I understand there's problems with the journalistic institution, but the idea that journalism on the whole is a problem and journalists are bad, I'm that is a problem. But somebody was talking about, was getting dangerously close to that in regards to talking about video game reviews by journalists, just on the whole. Basically said oh man, don't take reviews from, journalists seriously. You can't really believe those things. And it came from this perspective of fandom and wanting to love a thing. And therefore, you either hate it as much as possible or protect it as much as possible.
Yeah.
And I realized that this person who I thought I kind of understood just had a completely different understanding of the media landscape around video games that I did. Right.
Yeah.
And they probably were not aware of, this may be an episode later, y'all, of the failing of the media industry generally, but specifically within the video games vertical, across the industry.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is it is actually about ethics in gaming journalism.
Yes. You teased that joke an hour ago, and I did not think it was going to make it into the episode.
I wasn't sure that I was going to get into it, but yeah, it's an interesting point. It is not just the challenges of like, how do I know who to trust, right? Like, because one of the critiques that could be had of reviews writ large nowadays, right, is the like return of a sort of pay for play model, right? Even though it's not paid, maybe they're getting the items for free, and is that paid, you know, like, and the complications of all of these things, right? And we see this playing out on TikTok. We see this playing out actually even within the like the pro-Palestinian online activism spaces. You know, one of the things that I have seen is this like explosion of sales of t-shirts or keychains or items or whatever that have the slogans on them that say Free Palestine or have watermelons or other things, right? To sell to support a different X, Y, or Z cause, right? And like, I have a whole other thing about why you shouldn't buy merch to support the causes that you care about. You should just give them your money directly because of consumerism, yada, yada, yada. But one of the other things is like people selling kufiyas on TikTok, right? And I experienced over and over again, I do not trust TikTok Shop as an entity for a wide variety of reasons, for like scammy drop shipping reasons, consumerism, blah, blah, blah. But also like the amount of vetting that I need to do when someone says, this is a kufiya from Palestine, right, and kufiya is the black and white or red and white or other colors as well, you know, patterned traditional scarf that people wear. How do I know? How do I know that it is actually coming from someone in Palestine? How much work do I have to do to figure that out, right?
There's basically not a way that you can in that setting.
Right. And like Google is free. There are tools to help you figure that out, but it requires a high level of media literacy to do it. So the ethics in gaming journalism joke is like, I feel like I want to just start saying that catchphrase, but it's like, it's about the ethics of media literacy. Like, I don't know how to get across. Like the thing that I'm really like stuck on all the time right now is media literacy and how people are consuming and then digesting and regurgitating that information, right? One of the other ways that I see this showing up is like this pressure, right? Thinking about what is stopping people or what is motivating people to be involved right now, right? Is, you know, first that pressure to be an expert, but also the pressure to be on the right side of history, right? And the way even there being a right, you know, quote unquote, side of history reinforces polarization. And like, Matt, how many minutes talking about polarization do I have to do?
Oh boy. I don't know. I will say my feelings on polarization.
Great. Say them.
I think polarization is absolutely the cause of a lot of problems, especially in the United States. And also, I think talking about polarization often leads to a both sidesism that I find really gross. And it is hard to have a nuanced conversation about polarization and the problems it causes and the ways to fix it, because it weirdly gets overwhelmed by the way that people are polarized.
Yeah. It's almost as if things do not exist on a binary. And if we break apart that binary, then we can start to really like get to the heart of the issue.
I feel like you're a little biased on this issue, AC.
Wow. I'm sorry. Are you coming after me, a non-binary person, for being anti-binary? I'm non-binary, not anti-binary. Thank you very much. Actually, no, that's not true. I shouldn't make that joke. I am anti-binary. Except for the computer kind. I love my robot overlords.
Beep, beep, boop, boop.
Beep, beep, boop, boop. Okay. So this is like, I also feel compelled to say in this moment, you know, we are being lighthearted in the course of having a conversation about something that is really not lighthearted.
Right.
It's good to do that, actually. It is a pressure release. It is a stopgap for you, a human person, having a difficult conversation about a difficult thing. Being engaged around these topics does not mean choosing suffering 100% of the time, right? Letting go of polarization and letting go of the idea of being on the right side of history is as much about giving yourself to room to understand that this is a long-term project. This is a lifelong commitment, right? It's one of the reasons why we say, may we see a free Palestine in our lifetime. Because what we acknowledge is that this is our turn to carry forward this cause of justice. And may we see it be resolved in our lifetime. But we know that it may not be, because we know that this is a long arc of justice that we are on together, right? I think one of the other things I've noticed a lot in this pressure to be on the right side of history is this sort of like false memory of like historical involvement of the United States in ending genocides. I don't see this a ton, but I've seen it occasionally, right? Like I see it more conceptually than I do in specifics, right? This idea that the US is the world's police officer or watchdog, and we think of that as a good thing. We're forgetting, our anti-carceral nature. It's not good for the US to be the police of the world, right?
Yeah.
And we misremember how long it often took for the United States to actually get involved in these things, right? Like, the whole deal about World War II is that the U.S. was under isolationist policy and did not engage until the United States was directly attacked, right? Like, the whole thing about Bosnia-Herzegovina and, the reason why what happened in Kosovo and in Bosnia is such a stain on Bill Clinton's presidency is because the United States failed to act. The whole world watched a genocide play out in Bosnia and wrung our hands for 4 years over whether or not to get involved and stop it, right? I mean, I think this pattern of inaction in the face of international crisis is familiar. We are not the saviors of the world. And if you look at history and you're a student of history, that's pretty clear.
Often
right?
we're the aggressors of the world.
We're
the
very
oppressors.
much yes, correct. Right. And we framed that oppression as victory, liberation, and success. Yes. Right. And when we can remember and hold that, we do better by ourselves to remember being on the so-called right side of history isn't just about the government doing the right thing. It is about being aligned in your community, being aligned with yourself, right? And speaking and taking action that makes you feel good. And good is such a weird word to use here. I think part of this is, Matt, we don't have good words. We don't have good words to describe these things.
Right.
The last part of the pressure to be on the right side of history, right, is what's the best time to take action, right? Well, I haven't been involved so far, so won't people think that it's hypocritical that I'm getting involved or I'm doing something or I'm saying something now? And yeah, some people might. Some people might say, where have you been? Throwing up their hands in frustration. I certainly, as somebody who's an abortion organizer in Oklahoma, right, have had many moments where I've been like, where were you? Where were the 80 of you that showed up for this fun thing when I was sitting in the Senate gallery over it day after day to watch them pass bill after bill restricting our rights? Like, where were you? Is an easy thing to say and feel. But the reality is that the so-called best time to take action might have been on October 7th, although, as we've said, this is an issue that exists far before that moment in time. The second best time to take action is right now, right? Like, the second best time, which is still really good, is the moment that you feel inspired to take action. That is good. And I think that you will find that if you are someone who hasn't been really involved or hasn't been like politically or socially engaged around this kind of social justice work in the past, you will find that it gets a little bit easier each time. When you have taken action once, it is easier to take action on both the same thing and other things in your community the next time.
Yeah.
And like ideally you find other people who make that easier and easier for you, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, we're going to talk a little bit about this in a bit here, but I have found that it was easier for me to continue giving money, right, to various GoFundMes and whatnot, and get over like the hump of like, do I have this, right? The reality is that I do. I can't afford it, right? But to get over that initial thought process when I'd done it once or twice.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And I find it. I saw this TikTok the other day. I don't know if you're aware of Ayame on TikTok.
Oh yes, yes, and Yuval. I know all about
Yuval.
Yeah.
Maybe another episode, but I think it was her that was saying like it's like donating to Operation Olive Branch is the first time that she has felt like not necessarily hope, but like not everything was awful all of the time.
Yeah.
Right. And that feeling, I acknowledge that like my feelings are not the purpose, but if my feelings being improved makes the reality for someone else different, then I'm going to take that as a win.
Yeah.
Right. Because it has made it easier for me to do the third or fourth or fifth donation. Right. And that, you know, that has made hopefully somebody's life meaningfully better and actively better.
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is right. This speaks to the third pressure, right? The third pressure to take meaningful action, right? Mm-hmm. I want to be doing it in the best way possible. I want it to be as meaningful as possible, right? Like, and one of the things that is really hard here is like, how do you make something meaningful in the face of the knowledge that like none of this, anything that I do will never be a substitute for what is actually needed in this moment, right? Because what is actually needed in this moment is global actors with the political power that who have political power to leverage that power to end the genocide, right? Like that's what we need is actually total like systemic overhaul for the president of the United States to redirect our relationship with the country of Israel and condemn its actions in the same way that it would condemn these actions if Russia or China or another country were doing this same kind of like tactic against their own citizens. And I use the word citizens there, and then that's like a whole complicated thing that I have to tell you about how Palestinians aren't actually citizens of Israel, and that's like a whole other can of worms. Yeah. So, you know, this pressure to take meaningful action has resulted in people saying things like, oh, like supporting Palestine is like trendy right now. It's like, oh, standing up against genocide is trendy. And like, okay, I don't care, actually.
Yeah, it can be trendy and right.
It is actually good if it is trendy to be against genocide, right?
Correct.
Like you could say that it was trendy to be against the Vietnam War in the US in the 1960s as that movement picked up steam, right? Like when we talk about trends as a bad thing, we often mean that they have short life cycles. But what I am seeing is not trendiness. It is a group of largely like younger people who have experienced a series of things that have spurred them to be consistently engaged in collective action. And that has looked different for different people, but ranges on issues from like gun violence to climate justice to...
I mean, when we were in college, it was queer rights, right?
Sure,
like,
queer rights.
Yeah.
I mean, but also like police violence and brutality is like the big one, right? Because in college for me, it was as much police violence and brutality, right?
Agreed.
And the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, right, by police, that got me to my like the level of engagement that I have around actually the issue of Palestine, right? Like I read Angela Davis's books about the connections between Black social justice in the United States and the Free Palestine movement, right? And the movements of Palestinians against the oppressors of Israel, and the ways that those two movements can learn from each other because their oppressors are also learning from each other and how to engage in that oppression, right? The U.S. Army and the Israeli Army, like, they share resources. It's not just the United States giving Israel bombs, right? They share tactical information. They share training information, right? Like these two empires are bound up within one another, right? And so in the same way, it's like if our oppressors can learn from each other, then we can learn from each other in resistance, right? And I highly recommend Angela Davis's work on this. Freedom is a Constant Struggle, like which talks more about this. It's very digestible. It's like a series of essays. It's pretty easy to read and to follow. But like all of this whole conversation, right? Like we've gotten this far into the conversation and we haven't even mentioned like ongoing genocides in the Congo or Sudan, right? Like I said, the US might go after China, but like for this same kind of thing, but the oppression of the Uyghur Muslims in China says otherwise, right? Like there is a crisis of violence across our planet that stems from the history of colonialism, and also just like there are many people who have written about the violence of the world and why humanity is so plagued by violence. You know, I don't have to talk about that, but what I can talk about and what I do think is helpful to say is like all of this comes down to like power and types of power, right? And how we feel disempowered in that moment of like that hard pill to swallow, right? That I am going to do all of these things and I have to live with the knowledge that my individual action, right? My individualized action will not in and of itself be the thing that makes the difference, but it might, right? Like, because it's a lot of individualized actions that makes the difference, right? The type of power that you have can change how much impact you can have, right? So
there was a video I saw the other day of a person talking about Congo, what's going on in Congo. And if you don't know history, there's a history in Congo of slavery, specifically, and violence for the mining of I believe it's cobalt,
yes.
And which is used in electronics of all kinds, everywhere. Basically, every piece of electronics you use includes cobalt, finite resource, really only found in Congo. And their suggestion was one thing you can do is not buy something that's brand new.
Yeah.
Buy something that's a couple years old, buy something that's refurbished or used. And that is a step you can take, right? Yeah. If you unless you 1,000,000% absolutely need that thing, right? Or just keep the thing you have longer, right? Which is a thing that I personally, for those reasons, for others, I am a tech geek, right? I am always getting the new thing. And have had to just come to realizations you know what? I'm not going to stop purchasing things entirely. That's not what's being asked of me. What's being asked of me is to make intentional decisions, right? About the things that I actually do need. And I don't know. It was an interesting way that I saw the things that I could do for this thing that I felt I had no control over.
Yeah. And it can be hard to say I have power when in the grand scheme of things, right? I don't have a lot of power, relatively speaking, right? All of these different types of political power, social capital, monetary power versus economic power. I mean, all of these terms, right? Power in and of itself, there's an entire subfield of study in political science specifically dedicated to studying power and power dynamics, right? True in sociology, power is something that is studied. Power mapping is something that we think about and we talk about all the time in activism and tactics. How are you going to get to the person who has the power to make this decision and make this different, right? And so when we scale all the way up to the person that we have to get to who can make this decision is President Biden, it's really easy for us to sit back into disempowerment, right? It's really easy to say, what would it matter? What will it matter? And so, a lot of people were in this space of what can I do? What is the best thing to do? We're feeling all of these pressures, right? And what I said earlier, the best time to take action was when everything began. And the next best time to take action is right now, right? And what can you do? The answer is do anything. Anything that is within your power to do is the best starting place, right? And like, that's what Aaron Hadimer did. Aaron Hadimer said, Aaron Hadimer, a TikTok creator with a little over 1 million followers, right? Said, I am fed up with seeing all of these creators around me who have social capital in terms of the number of people who follow them. I am tired of seeing them not do more when they could be using that social and political power, social power, social capital to move other people to action, right? And so Aaron starts making these videos, tagging them with Pass the Hat. And, one of her followers coined that term. She's been open about that, right? And started this Pass the Hat. So the idea was through Pass the Hat, Aaron was encouraging people to reach out to Operation Olive Branch and to select a family who has worked with Operation Olive Branch, which is an all-volunteer, organization. Organization is like a loose term. They're not like a legal entity organization in any way, right? Like they're a group of people who have been motivated to do what is functionally facilitate a mutual aid network, right? Now, it's a little bit different. I do recommend also, if you're listening to this, that you read Mutual Aid by Dean Spade. It's a great book. It is really, really informative for like what mutual aid can do for us in moments where, we know that the only thing that we have is each other, which is one of the moments that we are in right now, right? The only thing that we have is other people who are with us and engaged on this. The GoFundMes, right, are set up by individual families who are vetted by Operation Olive Branch. Aaron starts making these videos that go viral, like truly viral, calling out all kinds of creators with millions of followers. This also coincides with like the Met Gala happening, Haley Bailey's, fall from grace, as it were, where she makes this video in her very expensive Met Gala outfit saying, let them eat cake. And everybody is like, what the fuck? And like, rightfully so. And I think like one of the other things that I'm thinking about, Matt, is like, I think one of the things is that Aaron was right. Aaron was right to be frustrated to see other creators not using the social capital that they had to do good. And we're not always responsive to like the realities of what it does mean to speak on this issue, right? Not in terms of like the consequences that you might face, like the social consequences that you might face of like losing followers, and for creators that meaning losing income, yada, yada, yada. But like the experience of having thousands of people be mad at you online and choosing to sign up for that experience, right? And I don't mean that to say I absolve people who are choosing not to do that. What I do mean to say is, if we can't have questions and we can't be uncertain when we give our opinions online, if we need to be experts, we are as much feeling these pressures ourselves as we are putting them onto other people, right? And if you are going to speak on an online platform, you have to be ready. You have to be ready for a wide range of reactions, including, I know more about this and I think that you're wrong. And you have to be ready to decide, I'm good with that. I'm good that you think that. I'm good with the fact that you think that I'm wrong, right? And I don't know, standing in the courage of your own convictions is hard.
Yeah.
But it's worth it, right?
Yeah.
But it is hard. So I don't know. This Pass the Hat moment, right? Giving money to Operation Olive Branch, right? I think the thing that does make me stressed about it overall is, and I want to be clear, I'm not accusing you of this. And that is a thing that I like.
Yeah.
It's about media literacy, Matt. Okay. Yeah. What I worry is that, Aaron has said in a video on May 14th, right? Pass the Hat was never meant to be a long-term solution. Operation Olive Branch is not a long-term solution.
Correct. Yeah.
Where we will create pitfalls for ourselves as white people in America who are inundated with liberalism on a regular basis is thinking that we can give to families in Gaza who are experiencing a genocide being perpetrated against them and their families, and that we can monetarily give $10 to a family per month, or whatever amount of money per month makes us comfortable. You know, what Aaron has been saying in the past, the hat videos, is if you have $1,000 in your bank account, give $5 to a family in Gaza, right? Mm-hmm. But the long game is what we're really here for, right? Because it's not just ceasefire now. Right. It is ceasefire now and a free Palestine in our lifetime, right? Like, correct. Ceasefire now, and Palestine and Palestinians must be released from the thumb of the Israeli government, right? Mm-hmm. The thumb of oppression. And so, you know, I don't know.
I mean, even like that is obvious to me in just that, like, the goal here, right, with Operation Olive Branch, Pass the Hat, is to get as many Palestinians out of Gaza as possible, right? Largely going through Egypt. Largely that money is, as I understand it, I may be incorrect, going to bribes to get across the border.
Yeah.
Right? And that is a temporary solution to a problem, right? Because even, like you said, even the step after that, which would be a ceasefire, a true ceasefire, is right there, is obvious, should happen now, right? But is like even more of a solution to the problem than people escaping is, right? But like you said, there are steps after that that we obviously want.
Yeah.
Right? And so this can be a solution to reduce the number of people who are dying.
Yeah.
Right? But Palestinians should have their home, right, and should be free and out of under that oppression. So that is obvious to me, right? That like that Operation Olive Branch is a form of treatment of a symptom, right? It is not an ultimate solution.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I say this as someone who, like, the only, when I have gone through job vetting, you know, the only tweets I've ever been asked to delete by an employer were one, calling Steny Hoyer a punk ass bitch for not being as pro-abortion as I think he should have been, which I stand by. And the other were posts about Palestine and my strong personal belief that a free Palestine is the only thing that, you know, begins to get us close to resolving the occupation and genocide of the last 100+ years, right? You know, something that I think a lot about is this idea that, you know, the creation of the state of Israel is the thing that displaced Palestinians from their homes, right? That the first Nakba is the thing that displaced Palestinians from their homes. But like the reality is that, like, I don't want to be like, go read about the Sykes-Picot agreements. Like if you were to read about the Sykes-Picot agreements, right? The occupation by the British and the French of that region and the way that the British and the French drew the lines of those countries, like, you should learn about it as an American because of how it also implicates what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq and
the United States,
the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan and Iraq.
I think it also, just talking about drawing lines and cutting up territory, like I'm just immediately thinking of like what we did to Native Americans, right? Yeah. These are the world and the West have a history, right, of oppressing peoples to get things that they desire, right? This is not a unique situation, but it's the one that is happening in our lifetimes that we have control over.
Yes, as Karl Marx would say.
Here we go.
Like, right. I mean, right. What we're talking about here is, right, like, I think you and I both believe that, like, the basic world order, right, is this conflict over resources. And that resources-based conflict is, like, the root of Marxist theory, right? Right. That these systems and this competition, right, this inherent belief that there is only so much land or there is only so much resources, and the person who deserves them is the person who gets there first, or the person who has the power to keep them, or whatever, bullshit. It's what lands us in this idea that, like, in order for my action to be meaningful, it must be the thing that makes the change, right?
Right.
It is like this individualist mindset that I am afraid of setting in with folks as something like Operation Olive Branch becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's not to say that, like, families don't deserve to escape genocide, because absolutely they do, right? But the challenge becomes when my goal, like for me, the thing that I want is for those families to never be escaping a genocide in the first place. Where do I place my action, right? What is it that I do?
The conversation about, like, conflicts around resources is also the way that the obvious and historical violence against and genocide of Jewish people has been by some bastardized into the oppression of Palestinian people, right? That is directly tied to that conflict for resources as well. And I find we've talked a lot about it being difficult to talk about things, right? In this episode. And the one that always is difficult for me to talk about is that I find anti-Semitism is an obvious and real problem in the world, right? Jewish people across the globe have been oppressed, continue to be oppressed, right? And also, the actions of the Israeli state are vile and awful and are being excused by a bastardization of the understanding of that anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And I see the tie directly from the things that you were discussing around conflicts for resources and those things.
Yeah. I mean, description didn't evade you. You just described it very well. Like, that is all very, very true, right? And I think, like, to get around to this point of, like, the tactics that Aaron Hadamar was using with Pass the Hat in terms of, like, I'm going to use a very specific framing here. Aaron calling in fellow creators, right? Aaron was not calling out people, right? Calling out is something that you do to, like, a person who has more power than you. Arguably, Aaron and many of these other creators have similar amounts of social power on this platform, right? It was very evident to me that Aaron was, like, looking to creators with, and she talked about this in her videos, with as many, if not more, followers than her, right? Like, the importance here of, like, Aaron's tactic of not punching down, right, as it were, right, of finding people with more power, right? Like, that is the way, like, if you're, like, stuck in trying to figure out how to take action, right? It's like, am I taking action to help someone who either has less power than me, right? To give them some of my power, let them borrow it, which is what we do when we give monetarily and we share money in mutual aid processes, right? Or am I calling out someone who has more power than me, right? Whether that's by taking action, sending a letter, protesting, right? But calling in, by contrast, right, is seeing someone with similar power to you, with similar information, similar resources, and saying, like, hey, I think you could be doing more, right? And I think Aaron was really brave to do this. There certainly has been some, like, discourse, right, that people could have about us, right? That Aaron got interviewed online, and there was backlash because it was basically like, Aaron did this interview where she spoke on behalf of Palestinians, and Palestinian creators were like, hey, like, you didn't need to do that. You could have, like, one of us could have done that, right?
Right.
And there are legitimate things to be learned here from that, right? And I think Aaron did a really good job of apologizing, working to repair that harm, right? But I do also think that there is something, like, worth saying, like, people want to be critical of the fact that, like, Black activists, Palestinian activists, other activists of color from other oppressed communities have been speaking out on this for a long time, right? And the frustration that Aaron is the one who gets the spotlight in this moment, or that white creators speaking up on behalf of Palestine in the moment, like, is a justifiable frustration. And also, we all benefit from any opportunity for people to be saying loudly and openly that we are a large group of people of intersectional identities, I think would be the way that I'm supposed to say diversity now. I sound like a right-wing crank. I'm sorry. I gotta stop that. I just I don't know, Matt. I'm starting to get worked up in this way of I was texting you yesterday in prep for this episode that one of the things that I did was I went back and I read some of the papers that I wrote when I was in college. And I'm getting worked up and I'm getting frustrated because it does also feel like in the 20 something years that I've been engaged around this issue since I was an upstart high schooler who, thought they were going to save the world, right? Not a lot has changed. And that's also not true. Things have changed. They have gotten
I was going to say they've gotten actively worse.
They've gotten worse, right? And so what do we do in the face of that? And I think the answer is we have conversations like this. We do what we can, and we remember that it is about the long game. We remember that the long game requires strategy, right? So Operation Olive Branch is a very strategic and intentional thing, right? It is, we're not going to end the genocide with this. This is the next best thing, right?
Yeah. I do want to say too that earlier you mentioned we're going to get it wrong. Aaron has, gotten it wrong before. If there are things you have heard today or you hear in the future, you heard in the past about us, let us know. We're chill. We are happy to be corrected and we'll do what we have to do, to make that right. An important part of, I don't know, my personal journey, but also just me caring about this particular issue is about listening to people, right? That know more than me. If you're just going to tell me that I'm wrong and that I should support the Israeli state, then I'm not going to listen to you, right?
Sure.
But I am open, and I know that you, AC, are open to those kinds of feedback.
Yeah.
But where we are now, these are the things that I think that I know that we believe, and that the things that we want to fight for to make better in the world.
Yeah. And I think that some of what's worth saying too is if you are someone who is Jewish and is feeling challenged by, anti-Zionist narratives, there are a lot of people having inter-community conversations within the Jewish community around this, right? There are people within, the Armenian community. If you are someone who is Armenian, who's experienced, whose family experienced the Armenian genocide and you feel connected to and called to, right? There are people who can talk to you about it from that context, right? And so I think the part of this of what of my identities ties me to this, right, is the my queerness is what ties me to this because it is the thing that I have experienced that has demonstrated to me what the face of oppression can it look like when it is turned on me personally, right? And I know that my obligation, my responsibility, the people that I will call in, right, are my queer family and queer community members when we're talking about this. That's my priority for who I engage with on this, right? And you're we're making this episode that's going to be published publicly. It's going to be published for everyone to listen to, right? Yeah. And going to post about it on my personal social media channels and things like that. But, my audience, when I'm thinking about who I am trying to talk to, who I am trying to reach, and also who I am looking out for to be speaking up on this, right, are my queer comrades, right? And when I see gaps in that discourse, that is where I'm looking to add and looking to call in and bring people in.
Yeah.
And I think that this sort of closing note, I think for me on some of this online conversation aspect of it is the frequency with which online discourse really uplifts the "it took you long enough" narrative over the "thank goodness you're here" narrative, right? And I think that this was a particular facet, and something that I really actually admired that Aaron did, right, is like, as creators started to make videos responding to Aaron, right, and doing something, there started to be a genre of videos making fun of those people, right, being like, okay, here's your like staged, you know, influencer video where they're finally talking about Operation Olive Branch, and it's always like the same, like they put their hands together, they're sitting down, you know, it's like close framed. It's like, hey, I want to talk to you about something that's been on my mind a lot lately. And then it's going to be like the genocide and talking about Operation Olive Branch. And like, I get that gut instinct. And also, wasn't this what you wanted?
Yeah, it doesn't help anyone either. And also, like, maybe you're right. Maybe it is justified to feel those things, right? And also, I think the creating more discourse out of it is really the thing that I think is not valuable.
Yeah.
The thing that is value is people being there, standing up for the things they believe in, and bringing more people in.
Yeah.
And your phrase, "thank goodness you're here," is the thing that I feel really positively about. It's a thing that gives me hope in all of this. And I guess that's to say to people listening, if this is the thing that like got you to take some action, like, welcome, we're happy you're here. Like, yeah. I don't feel any ill will towards you for figuring it out now. I'm glad. And also, like, if you've got ideas of what the action that we can take, I'm down.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I really like, I mean, I say this, I have felt that anger and that frustration. And I also, like, I have expressed it to you, Matt, to my comrades, right? Like, it is an appropriate thing to be expressed in the right setting for it, right? And I'm not saying, like, we have to fall all over ourselves to say thank you to these celebrities for doing the literal bare minimum. And they're not every influencer is a celebrity. And like,
yes.
You've heard me on every other episode of the show talk about how we often forget that like many creators are just regular people.
Not to mention how you don't really believe in the idea of celebrity.
I don't really believe in the idea of celebrity, but like I do believe in the idea of like monetary power and social and political power, right? And like there's no denying that people who have celebrity or who have platform online have power. And in fact, that's why we're making this episode, right? It's like, I have a platform, I can record an episode about this, and so I will do that, right? I do not feel comfortable making anything about anything else until I make this, because it is important to me that I use my platform to talk about this, right? Yeah. And so all of that to say, you know, Erin's insistence that like, she's saying like, thank you. I'm so glad to see this from you. This is really great. Like, thank you. And like doing the hard work of when you are feeling fatigue, continuing to say thank you instead of I am so frustrated that it took us so long to get here, right? Sitting in anger rather than sitting in gratitude for support is really, really hard. And like, I just do think that it's worth it. Feel that anger, express it with your friends and the people who you are working with. But so much of like okay, this is actually sort of a totally different thing, but have you seen those videos that there's a few of them that have been going around on TikTok lately that are like, you all need to start Googling things more. Like, you need to start doing your research more instead of just like posting questions to the internet.
I have not seen this particular brand of video, but the concept of people just refusing to look things up is something I'm familiar with and have heard people talk about.
Yeah. So like all of this to say, right? Like, you don't have to look something up to believe that it's to believe it for yourself. Like, you don't have to fact check your feelings, right?
Wow, that's the quote of the fucking century.
You don't have to fact check your feelings.
Yeah.
You do have to fact check your facts.
Yes.
Right? But your opinions, your feelings, the things that you think and believe about the world and how the world should be ordered and what you can do about the world around you, like all of those things belong to you. And this is like a heart is a heavy burden, right? Like a soul and a mind are heavy burdens too, right? The power that we carry. I'm almost about to fucking quote Spider-Man. Gross.
Do it.
No.
Do it.
With great power comes great responsibility. That. But the thing about that is, like, when we say with great power comes great responsibility, we think of it in the context of Spider-Man. We think about literally having superpowers. But, like, the great power that I have, right, is, like, I'm a really good communicator. I really like talking to my friends at great length about tough issues. It's why I like doing this podcast with you, right? And that is my great power to use. Right? So what power do I have? How do I use that to help the people around me? And how do I do that in a way that is like empowers other people, right? All of this always comes back to something that D. Robertson, who was one of my professors, when I was an undergrad, when I was a freshman, I met Dee. She was a PhD student. She is a Muskogee Creek woman. She's incredible. She is the first person who ever said to me, the Toni Morrison quote, right? I tell my students, when you get these jobs that you have been so beautifully trained for, just remember that your real job is that if you are free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. This is not just a grab bag candy game, right? When you have $1,000 in your bank account, your responsibility is to find someone who needs $5. Mm-hmm. When you have $2,000, like however that scales for you, whatever that means for you, you know, some action is better than no action. It is not about perfect or best. It is about doing anything, because doing anything is all that any of us can do.
Yeah. It's more than a lot of other people are doing.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to end it. I want to say that I know you've got a bunch of links, at least in your notes, regarding resources of things people can do, ways they can take action, but also places that you can learn. I will be including all of those in the show notes for this episode. I'm happy to be back doing this with you.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be back doing this with you too. I know we chose a sort of big and heavy topic, but I want to express just some gratitude for you, that it was like really heartwarming for me to be able to say to you, like, I really care about doing an episode about this before we do anything else. And you said, yes, I do too.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I really want to do another X-Men episode, but I wasn't going to do it before this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like, to the point of like getting involved and like finding actions is like, I have linked out, the things we'll link out to are some like pretty high level stuff, like the BDS movement, the boycott, divest, sanctions movement, which has existed for literally decades. Right? Like there are anti-BDS laws on the books in a lot of states that were passed way before just this year. But there are other things that are more specific, like Jewish Voices for Peace, that will have local actions that you could potentially get involved with, or like small groups that you could get involved with. You know, if you're somewhere that doesn't have a big group that's doing things, right? Obviously, there's Operation Olive Branch, ways to get involved online. When I say do anything, I literally mean do anything. Even if that thing is picking up a book, it is following Bisan, it is finding one new thing that you are adding to your news digest for the day that helps you think about this, right? In a way that isn't overwhelming or like taxing, right? Some of this is about like doing anything, and all of us doing anything is about sharing the burden of doing the thing, right? Is about supporting each other and building sustainable communities involved in taking action together because of how long this project will be going on, right?
And has been going on,
right? Because we will need each other to step in and step out, right? And so, or move in and move out. So I don't know. I'm grateful to be here with you, Matt. I'm grateful to get to talk about this with you. And I am really excited to turn to what is sure to be an absolutely wild ride of a season where we talk about who knows what, honestly.
We've got a lot of ideas. I actually spent a good 3 hours researching an idea for an episode that will never happen because all of the websites have been scrubbed from the internet. So
incredible.
If I put that work, I feel like, into an episode that's not going to happen.
Yeah,
we've got lots of good stuff coming up.
Really living up to our we didn't need to research, but we did anyway.
Yeah. I also want to say, like, hey, if you don't have a space to talk about this stuff, like, happy to make our Discord channel the place for that. Like, if you got questions, you just don't have any clue. You just like need someone that like knows anything about this. One, I'll be posting the links from the show notes in there, but also two, happy to have those conversations in there with you. It's not a problem.
Yeah. And you can also, look at the hashtag Pass the Hat on TikTok. And if you look at the hashtag Pass the Hat on TikTok or go to Erin Hadimer's account and follow her, she and many, many, many other creators across TikTok, but also across many other social channels, right, are sharing lots of great sort of like starting point resources pointing to Palestinian creators, helping folks get connected. There are a lot of people doing that work. So there are lots of places to plug in. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good place to call it. We appreciate you all listening to this episode and for sticking around with us into season 3. I'm excited to continue doing this. There is no world where I don't want to be doing this with you, AC.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I want to thank the Worst Garbage for having us on the network. Hey, a lot of stuff's happened at the Worst Garbage since we were podcasting last. We have so many shows on this network now. So you know about Frog of the Week. You know about Into the Aether. You know about us. You know about Video Game Podtimism. You might know about 80%. But we also have 2 brand new shows. We have .zip, which is a totally new show. They say it is a show about big games and small packages where they play games that are under 6 hours, I believe is what they're going for, and talk about them. That's Kim, AJ, and Chase. Honestly, it's like a spiritual successor to Asynchronous, and I'm so happy that it exists.
Yeah.
And then you've got Paws and Claws, which is a podcast about the Warrior Cat series of books, which I had never heard of until Paws and Claws came out.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah. I had never heard about it. And then I was like in France and saw an ad for the Warrior Cats books like the day that the podcast came out.
That's so funny. I think that maybe we are just like a little too, like, Warrior Cats came out just a little bit after we were at the right age for them to have been the thing that we are obsessed with. I think we're Animorphs kids.
I was gonna say we're Animorphs. I read all the Animorphs books,
Yeah.
But yeah, Paws and Claws is a great show. I will admit that I have not listened to all of it, but when I do, I have a good time. And yeah, I believe it was their 3rd or 4th season they joined the network. They've been going for a while. They're pretty deep into the series. They're reading through it in chronological order, not in release order, which is the whole thing.
Matt, I'm pitching you a podcast for the Worst Garbage right now. It's a Magic Treehouse series.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
No. But yeah, you can check out all those shows on the worstgarbage.online, and the Discord that we're a part of is the Discord for those shows as well. So come hang out if that sounds interesting to you. Our channel in that Discord is Can't Let It Go. It's pretty easy to find. You can find us also at can'tletitgo.gay. All of our previous episodes, all the episodes to come. I want to shout out the people that helped make the show, which is Scout, one of the hosts of Paws and Claws.
Yeah.
She made our art. You can pay her to make art for you whenever she's got commissions open at ko-fi.com/humblegoat. And at Pragmatism on Twitter. That's my friend Ethan for making our music. I'd give you a hint for next time, but we got too much cooking. We got so much going on.
We're really in the kitchen. We're putting it together,
Yeah. I got a tiny kitchen, so it's kind of a mess.
Only us fits in there, actually. No one else. So maybe next time there's not even enough room for me to joke about us recording in the kitchen.
No, it cannot happen. It's really a problem how small my kitchen is. Anyway, we'll talk to you all next time.
Talk to you next time.
The worst garbage. Online.